Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Once There Was a Girl is the poignant true story of Wendy, a young black woman struggling to grow up in a housing project in New Orleans. Facing abject poverty, rampant crime, and formidable challenges, she believes against all hope that she will somehow survive. Her mother teaches her how to pray, and pray she does even when all hope of a better life seems fleeting and perhaps impossible. As time passed, Wendy struggles not to give up and fervently asks God to perform a miracle and deliver her from the projects to the world she hopes and dreams of. Wendy Randall grew up in the projects of New Orleans, where she survived daily challenges at school and her neighborhood, contending with fights, shooting, and bullying. She went on to earn her degree in foreign languages from Dillard University. She went on to Ohio State, the University of New Orleans, and National Louis University to earn her master's in adult education and development. She lived in Europe and worked as a substance abuse counselor. You can learn more about her at WendyReedRandall.com. And joining us now to talk about her memoir, Once There Was a Girl, is Wendy Reed Randall. Wendy, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, you have such a compelling story, and before I take you backwards, I want to talk to you about today.
Okay.
There are situations in America today that are being advanced and leveraged and dividing this nation in a way that is not edifying to either of the communities that it is supposed to unify. As a matter of fact, it's driving a wedge between them. I did a very lengthy commentary on critical race theory, and I know that's something you're familiar with. And I know that in your struggle to get out of the projects, you faced your own conflicts with color barriers and with the impact of the pressure to remain in conditions that were not ideal. And it was a struggle to get out of them. One was societal, and in New Orleans, it is a divided community, not only within the racial construct, but also within the parishes. And you find people who are of French Creole descent having enmity with those that are not. So there is both the social, there is the cultural, there is the faith divide between darkness and light, as well as a very clearly defined racial divide. And this is something you had to contend with. And I actually wanted your commentary first to get your opinion on what's happening today in driving this wedge where critical race theory says that if I am not actively involved in anti-racist activities by standard, by default, I'm a racist. And I'm a minister of the gospel. I'm not a racial activist, and so I'm advancing the kingdom of God, which in the Bible there's only two people, Jews and Gentiles. And this concept of ethnos was this new Greek introduction into society that became some wild effort to create the perfect specimen, and it was Aryan, and it was blonde hair, and it was blue-eyed, and it breeded a culture which is learned and indoctrinated. I've been to many infant wards where new babies are laying there in their cribs, and I've never seen a black baby or a white baby look across at the baby next to them, and because of the color of their skin, they've turned away. So we know that this is not something that a child is born a racist. I grew up in the Jewish community, the Jewish ghetto of Pittsburgh, which was on the border of a multicultural community in the 50s. And on my left hand was my best Jewish friend, and on my right hand was a little girl named Regina Jones. Well, Regina Jones is not a Jewish name.
Right.
All right. But 8 years of walking to elementary school. We started out in kindergarten walking, holding hands, first grade holding hands. By third grade, you weren't holding hands anymore because that kind of meant something, but you were still the same three kids went all the way through elementary school together as best friends.
Right.
And this is the 50s. This is when discrimination was not just to the black community, but to the Jewish community, which today it seems that anti-Semitism is the only permissible hate speech that's allowed in America. Everything else is taboo, but you can still be an anti-Semite and there's no consequence. So there's nobody advocating for that. I want to get your sense in retrospect as to the life that you came out of,
Okay.
what you experienced and what you see today from a commentary of being a woman of color, living in a world where people are promoting division as if it were under the guise of unifying, and in fact it is creating such a divide and such a fear of saying anything, and instead of trying to understand each other through
Right.
saying, listen, I don't know what that term means. Could you explain to me when you say this, what does that mean? That's how Jesus operated. He asked questions because he might have known the answer, but I don't know the answer. I'm a white Jewish guy from Pittsburgh. I don't know about the African community, African American community. So I ask a lot of questions and I get a lot of answers, and I have lots of great relationships because I took the time to understand, what does that term mean? And if I say this, what does that mean? What are you hearing when I say this? And so because you have navigated out of a world that was confined by racial tension, by poverty, you now have a unique perspective to look back and make a commentary on our condition today. And so I know that that is not about the book, but it is about you as a person and what you've learned, what you've experienced, and being able to be a voice today that I can say to you, I don't understand what is happening and why it's happening, and why this advancement of calling me a systemic racist when I've never in my life had anything but love for my fellow human being, and as a minister of the gospel, I see nothing but children of God.
Right.
So help myself and my audience understand this, because this is an important part of your story, but I want to contemporize it because I think it's a critical issue today, and what you went through was a symptom of a critical issue of that day.
Right. So first I would start off by saying that as a Christian, when I encounter people, and even as I was growing up, I want to show them the love of Christ and meet them where they are and connect with them as a human being. So when I see a person, and even from childhood, so my first best friend was a little white boy, but I was a child, and I was around 5 or 6 years old when we were friends. So I have endeavored throughout my life to meet people where they are and to see them as people first. Not that I acknowledge the difference in our skin colors, because that would be, doing a disservice to both of us. So I acknowledge that, if you're white, you are white, and I'm black. That's fine. But then at the deeper level, what do we have in common? How can I connect with you as a human being? And that's what I've endeavored to do. And that's how my mother raised us. I mean, we were raised during an era, as you said, years ago, when there were significant racial tensions in this country. But my mother, in spite of the fact that we were very poor and living in poverty, and we were oppressed in the truest sense of the word, we had significant issues. My mother encouraged us to see people as people. And within our home, she did not talk, and my sisters and I even talk about that to this day. Like, she really didn't talk about racial issues if they existed. She didn't say to me, well, Wendy, because you're black, you can't do this, and this is going to happen to you, and oh, you better go out there and watch out and stuff. I don't remember any of those things, and neither do my sisters. And they're younger than I. And so I grew up knowing in the background that there were all these issues, and there were the Black Panthers, and I mentioned that in my story, and all these things I knew, and Black Power. And I remember saying it in my home, like, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, and my mother would be like, what's going on? And it's not that she didn't want me to say it, but she wanted me to acknowledge to see myself as a person. And for some reason, the grace of God, she had that, it was in her, to see us that way. And I think if we go back to where she was raised in Evergreen, Louisiana. And her father, by the grace of God, happened to legally own like 80 plus acres, and we still own that land. And so she was raised in, there were racial issues. And I remember asking her, how did you guys deal with all of these things? And she said that, they just had a lot of sense of self-worth. And so when she would walk to school, she said, they couldn't get on the bus with the white children. They would walk to school. And she said, as the bus was passing, the kids would be saying things out the window. But she persevered, and, they walked to the school that they needed to go to. And they actually picked cotton, but they picked cotton for my grandfather, so they owned the land, and they actually were, she said that they even helped people in the community as a black family, because they had some means. They helped people in the community, and when they would slaughter a pig, she said they would, share with the community and so forth to help feed people who had a need. And, but with certain life happened, and so my mother ended up living in the Florida housing projects. And I think that from her birth and her upbringing, that sense of self-worth and and self-esteem stayed there with her, so that even though we lived in the projects, we were not the projects. We lived there, but that's not who we were. We were not, I don't remember being defined. I mean, I was struggling a great bit to grow up there, but I was never, I didn't want to be defined by being this little girl from the projects. And we didn't want people to pity us, we didn't want people to say, oh, poor little girls from the project. Now, we can't stop them. People did feel sorry for us because we had some issues going on. But I remember not really wanting that. I didn't want people to look at me and have a lot of pity for me and say, oh, poor little you, Wendy, you're not going to make it because you're poor and you live in the projects, and you struggle to find food and all of those things, and because your clothes look crazy, and your shoes are very old, and all the things, that describe us. And so I think right now in our country, the concerns that we have, and the love, the desire of people to help people and deal with racial issues and all of that, that's fine. But then let's say we take care of people and we get all of these external things done, but the internal person still lives. So when you go home, after you have given me my beautiful Band-Aid and you've enabled me to feel much better because there are programs in place and there are all these things that you've done for me. And I'm not, saying anything negative about that, because people do need help. I've worked in social services, so I know that there are needs, and I've been a teacher, and I know that there are needs in education and all of that. But at the end of the day, when the person, has all these things, I have all these things done for me, and then when I go home, I still take me with me wherever I go. So if the internal me has not been worked on, and as a Christian, I would say pointing people to Jesus, for salvation, that's the first step. But let's say that we're just dealing in a secular sense. If I haven't dealt with all of my hurts and all the things that cause me great problems, then I am now a person who has been helped externally, but internally I still struggle. If my issues of self-esteem and sense of self-worth have not been worked on by me, and I'm not internally motivated, right? You can throw all kinds of things at me, and I might take them and say, great, but then I'll still struggle and I'll still struggle, and I'll carry that struggle with me. And then that sort of perpetuates itself, because then many times individuals then have children, and those children have children, and then it becomes, without their meaning to, a systemic concern, within a family unit. And that's something that I think that no matter how much, we can't legislate self-esteem, and we can't give that to people. That is something internal, and so that's the part I think that we are missing as a country. The need to really sit down and have a conversation with people to get to know them. I've had many experiences where I have been the only Black person, where, and you walk into a place and you start to feel some kind of way, because, it's obvious. However, I know that from personal experience, when I have chosen to persevere and connect with people as human beings, to see what we have in common, then I have been blessed to go beyond those barriers that initially, divide us, to include any social economic issues, if I, for example, my being poor, having grown up poor in the projects, well, I always felt that, when I met someone, that I was a person that I had good, I mattered. We both mattered. You have more money than I do. You have more privileges than I do, but I don't want your pity. I want you to see me as Wendy, and, maybe you think I have a good sense of humor. Maybe you think that I'm an excellent reader. You see that I love languages, and that's what I prefer as a person. I want to be valued for who I am as a person, internally, not for you to just pull me in because of the color of my skin, and have me become like, something that makes you feel good about yourself. You know what I mean? Like, I feel good about myself. You feel good about yourself. We have certain attributes that we bring to the table. We connect as human beings. We communicate, and that's what matters to me, and that's what I've shared with my children. Just as my mother did, and my sisters and I, we talk about that, how we grew up. In our home, my mother wasn't talking about those things with us. She really wasn't. She wasn't. It was just a very, I guess, unusual type of situation in a sense, given the time in which we lived, given the poverty in which I grew up, given the significant issues that we face. We had to struggle greatly, and we did have to walk very carefully and navigate, to navigate our lives to make it out of the projects, because, it's sort of like you feel like you're going to be sucked in by the situation. And so I understand. My heart goes out to people who are still in the struggle, to people who are still living in that environment. It is very difficult, and you do need significant support systems to come alongside you to help you. The school, the church, the community, to come alongside you to encourage you, because as a child, you don't have any power, so you need someone to be there. So my heart does go on. So that's my goal as far as my telling my story, is to encourage people to know that no matter where you come from, that's not who you are. That does not define you, and to not let people define you in that way. To not label you as a poor person, as a underprivileged person. I mean, you are a human being who happens to live with some difficult challenges, right? So we acknowledge that, but that is not what defines you, because then when that happens, then people cease to dream, to have hope. Once you start, you can label people with all kinds of things. Once you start labeling people, then many of us we start to define ourselves by the label. And then that, for many people, that's the beginning of a very difficult life. It can be the beginning of many of the end. That's why some people become so successful, right? But then they fall because they haven't dealt with the person on the inside. They haven't worked on themselves to build up that internal sense of self-worth, to know that well, as a Christian, I see myself, knowing that in Christ, I am a new creature. Old things are passed away and all things become new. So, but for the grace of God, I would have been a statistic. It would have been a very easy thing. I mean, that's something that I wouldn't have had to study or even think about. All I needed to do was just go out the door and give in, and the rest would have been history. And my sister's the same thing, because with each passing year, as you mentioned, when babies are born, they're not looking at each other and noticing the color of the skin, and children are not. But then as the years go by, and you start to deal with some social issues, so each passing year, the need to have a sense of belonging starts to work on you, and you don't want to be ostracized. So whatever the status quo is, you start to want to give into that, and it's a real struggle to navigate not succumbing to drugs, not to succumb to promiscuity and all of the things that go with that. So that's a very, very tricky situation, and because it's so difficult, many people give in to the pressures that are placed upon them.
You expressed it beautifully, because life in the projects is a choice, and you can go out and become a teenage mother very easily and have a fatherless home, and that's going to perpetuate the poverty paradigm and just continue to increase and magnify the problem. You had a strong influence of a mother who was very clear to not promote, and that is actually the key ingredient, is because it is passed from generation to generation. These are things that you are indoctrinated into, sometimes subtly through casual comments. I've shared this before. I never thought that my family was racist. I never thought at all that there was any acknowledgement of color. But one time when I was going off to college, my father said, listen, I don't care who you date and who you bring home, just don't bring home a black girl. He was a Hungarian immigrant. I had never heard anything like that in my life. But it said one time to me, and it stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, being in college in the 60s and part of the hippie movement, Angela Huggins was part of a militant group, and I dated her cousin. And she went to school in Bennington, Vermont, and I used to leave Penn State and go see her in Vermont, and she used to come down and see me, and it was a very serious relationship, but that was always in the back of my head. And when I came to faith in Jesus 25 years later, that was brought back to my remembrance as something that was a seed that was planted. And yes, the Jewish community is a closed community. Yes, we've been raised from Deuteronomy to not to marry outside of Judaism, but to not to assimilate. But I can remember that one statement, and It was a reflection of something that was embedded in him. He was saying, don't bring home a Gentile girl, was what he was saying. Bring home a Jewish girl, okay? But it came out that way, and it revealed something that was disturbing to me. I mean, it disturbs me today. We weren't raised in that environment, but one statement, one seed like that.
Right.
And here I'm almost 70 years old. That has stuck with me for over 50 years. And raising my own children, I was like your mother. These we're all created in the image of God. God doesn't see any less value in any person. He loves all of us equally. And so I very much appreciate your mother's message, and it is generational. And once we understand that it's generational, and we can bring it out in the open and say, what decision will you make? What decision will I make when I am faced with this? Will I be programmed by what I've heard, or will I stand before the Lord and make my own decision? And I think that's a message for America today, is not what does the Democratic Party say, and what does BLM say, and what does the cancel culture say, but what does God say? And if we get back to what God has to say, the problem's solved. And so I thank you for that. We're talking with Wendy Reed Randall, author of a memoir, Once There Was a Girl, Her Story Out of Poverty. And I have used this first segment to get her insights. And her insights are a collection of her experience of growing up in the projects. So it's not really off topic, but I really wanted your honest assessment, because you experienced Europe, which is very different when it comes to I've always had a fascination when I've been to Europe, and I speak to a person of a different background, whether it's of color or religion, that has a French accent or has a British accent, because it's unusual. In America you don't hear that, but all over Europe you hear that, you see that. There's not these issues that we have here specifically in America. I'm sure that there are, but I'm not aware of them. You live there, and you could probably testify to that. But we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into this journey of here's a family that owned 80 acres, and you wind up in the projects. What happened? How did it go from what would be considered prosperity to poverty, to get your mother from, even today you own the 80 acres, which is wealth. The land has value, but yet wound up in the projects. Obviously decisions were made.
Correct.
And this is what it led to. And so we'll look at the genesis of that, and how through prayer and your mother's influence you were able to persevere. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps, and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitinganation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Wendy Reed Randall, author of Once There Was a Girl, a memoir, a story of a girl from the projects who wound up getting a master's degree in adult education and development and lived in Europe working as a substance abuse counselor. You can learn more about her at wendyreedrandall.com. Wendy, welcome back.
Hi, thank you.
So your grandfather owns 80 acres.
Yes, he owned 80 plus acres. Yes, that is correct.
And so here's a family that's flourishing. Here's a family self-sufficient and helping the community, and your mom was raised in that environment.
Yes, she was.
So what happened? That I'm sure that I can assume she met a boy.
Well, she actually left. So, long story short, at the age of 16, she decided to move to New Orleans, and she lived with my late aunt. And so she went to high school in New Orleans, Booker T. Washington High School, and she graduated from high school. And then after that point, at some point later, she didn't go to college. So she later met my father years later, and she married my father, who had issues with alcoholism. So the choice of her choosing to leave Evergreen, Louisiana, and not return, and going to New Orleans, some of that is a little bit, I don't have a clear picture of it, but I share as much as I can at the end of my story when I try to capture who she was. She didn't talk about it much, but she did seem to live with a lot of regrets. I could tell. And then I remember asking her, why can't we just move to Evergreen? My solution was, you say that there's a farm out there, and we're living in the projects and we're poor. So what is wrong with this picture? And so I remember as a kid, that was like a pet peeve of mine, because, when children, parents often make decisions that children don't have a clue of why they're doing certain things. But, and you can see it's adversely affecting them. And we know it's adversely affecting us as children. And so she just said she wouldn't discuss it really. She told me that I saw my grandfather as a baby, that I would, he saw me as an infant, but I have no recollection of him. I knew that during he died, when I was really young, so I don't have like any recollection. Her mother passed before I was born. So, and that also factored into her leaving, because her mother had some mental health concerns after losing two sons who were killed they were trying to beat the train, and the train killed them. And so subsequently, she suffered with some issues, and then, the story is a little bit muddled, like I said, but my mother then made the decision to move to New Orleans. And I'm thinking more or less for education, that I think that factored in, to be able to go to a high school and, to leave Evergreen with all of the concerns that, would have been going on back at that time. And, a lot of people were, I guess as we look at movies and read stories of people, lots of Blacks and African Americans were moving all over the country to get to a better place, where they felt like there were more opportunities. So I think that factored into it. But I think that, like many of us, we make decisions and we live with regrets, So I think that if she could have done something different, she would have, but she had children. My father had issues with alcoholism. They had a period of being separated. So that's why in my story, in the beginning, I talked so much about my mother. My father was there when he came back into our lives. And, but he was supportive, but more of like a silent figure, kind of like a strong, my mother, like in many homes, my mother kind of ruled the day, basically. She was that person who was like, no, you can't do this. Yes, you can do this. My father would say, what does your mother say? And so forth. So that's how we were raised. And then, so we remained poor even after he came into our lives because of his, he only had an 8th grade education. So that was the situation. And I just think that my mother, did the best that she could, in a sense, with what she, with what had happened to her. And I think that moments when she would be walking around the kitchen singing, when she got really upset, she started singing hymns and stuff. And so I just felt like that was her way of expressing her pain, and just navigating, because I don't know how she made it, frankly. I mean, if I think about what she went through and think about to lose what she had and to end up where she was, at that time, and to all the struggles that we had growing up that I share in my story, it's the grace of God that, she was sane, and she wasn't, just depressed. I mean, I didn't note her being depressed or anything like that. I mean, she would be like quiet at times, and pensive. She prayed a whole lot. So that was huge. She prayed, she spent a lot of time on her knees in prayer. Sometimes I would think she had fallen asleep. I didn't know what was going on, but I think that is what sustained her. It's the grace of God. It's the mercy and grace of God that helped her to navigate what she ended up, the life she ended up living.
There's a pattern that I've seen and observed firsthand, that the more impoverished the community, the more exuberant the praise is. That the church that is in the worst neighborhood with the worst crime, with the worst gang violence, that they dress up for church. It is a place where there is the most profound, to hear of an almost 70-year-old white Jewish believer in Jesus tell you that black gospel music is my favorite music. It evokes out of pain and poverty such an expression of gratitude for that widow's mite, gratitude for the air you breathe, gratitude for surviving one more day and not have to bury another son. It's kind of rejoicing that no tragedy befell me that day, or that I had that there was enough of a meal there at the church that I could at least have myself and my kids have a decent meal for one day. And I'm much more drawn to preach. If I got two invitations on the same day, one was from a mega church and one was from an inner city church, I would take the inner city church invitation because of the music, because of the blue-haired lady in the big hat. Provokes me to jealousy at the amount of expression of just unbridled devotion to God. It is a sight to see. And it sounds like your mother had this deep, abiding love for God, that she could pour out all her problems and all her regrets and all her woes, and then inspire you to have a life of prayer, because that even in the worst situations, her go-to was prayer.
That's true. Indeed, yes. She prayed a lot, and she told us to pray. You know, that was her solution. Her solution was always pray, and like I've shared before with other people, you know, that was not my solution. That is not the solution that I really wanted to hear. You know, I mean, I wanted her to do something, but she said it enough. So, and I realized that I guess that's what I need to do, because that apparently that's, you know, she just was, I would say she was stoic, you know, she just was very stoic. And so, in a quiet way. And so she was a quiet person, her demeanor, you know, but loved by many people, you know, but she was pretty stern, that's for sure. And she had a lot of rules that we had to follow, you know, and that also factored into my life, especially during my teenage years, when I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, and I felt ostracized by the kids, and, you know, I dressed funny. For one thing, I can give you one example. We could not wear pants. She decided that, you know, she read in the Bible in Deuteronomy, and she said that we could not wear pants. And that was an argument that I had with her every year growing up. Like, what is that about? And she was determined. And so then people would look at us and say, well, why do you guys not wear pants? And so they thought that we were part of some religious group where we couldn't wear pants, and they couldn't believe it. I grew up in your Baptist church, a missionary Baptist church. So that's where I grew up. And so people wore pants, but, you know, for leisure and stuff, not to say they were wearing pants in church at that time, but they did wear pants, but we were not able to, because she said we could not wear clothes that pertain to a man and so forth. And so long story short, it was just a problem throughout the years.
So you attribute praying your way out of poverty, praying your way out of the situation, and being able to go off to college and to fulfill your dreams and have a life of education and break away from that. And you attribute prayer as you prayed your way out of your circumstances. Help our audience understand how you see all that fitting together, that it was this relationship with God that allowed you to take this impoverished hand and put it into a scarred hand and have him pull you out of poverty and into a very successful career, a very fulfilling life, a very articulate communicator that's not always the byproduct of the projects.
Sure. So I would say because my mother led by the example of praying, and she had all of these rules in place. So in turn, I started to internalize that, and then also being in the church every time the doors were open. You know, we were at church all the time, and all surrounded by, you know, Christians and, you know, the good sisters in church and the deacons and so forth, people encouraging us to do well. I started to internalize those things because a lot of people encouraged me. They came alongside and said, for example, I would be the person that they would ask to be on the program and say a poem, and read this, and be the mistress of service and do all kinds of things, even as a child. I mean, I started teaching like a little Sunday school class as a child. So all of those things helped me with my self-esteem and gave me hope. And then so I spent a lot of time at the church, which was not in the projects. It was located on the other side of the industrial canal. And so I just the idea of my being able to navigate the projects, to leave and to go other places, and then praying and believing that God was answering my prayers. I just had the faith of a child. I had the faith of a child, and I just felt like at some point in the future we would leave the project. And that's what I held on to. So even when I was doing crazy stuff, trying to navigate my teenage years and trying not to feel like I was stuck in the projects, I kept having just that little glimmer of hope. And some days I just had like a tiny bit of hope. Just some days, it was hard for me to find hope depending on how I felt in the moment, because teenage years are very difficult. So those were the years in which I really struggled with being in the projects, because the pressures of become so much different when you're a teenager. When you're a child, you have that childlike innocence and things, it's not to say that things don't happen to children, because they do. And often in impoverished neighborhoods, children grow up a lot quicker, than they want to, because they see things. And I had some of those experiences, but the pressure during teenage years became even greater. And I had to keep holding on, just holding on. And I would sit around at the kitchen table and talk to Mama, I call her in the book, and about all my concerns. And she would listen. She was a quiet person, and I talk a lot. And she would say, "You just talk so much." She's like, "You just talk too much." And I would just sit there and complain and argue with her and find things to just we would butt heads a lot. But she would listen to me, thank God, And she wasn't a punitive person. She did discipline us, but she wasn't the in-your-face type of parent. She had a very stern look, and we knew what that look meant when we saw it, and so we were disciplined. But I just felt like I needed as a teenager to be able to express myself in a safe way. And I was able to talk to her. Not that I shared everything, because like most teenagers, you hide things from your parents. But when I had significant concerns, I would sit down and talk to her. And as usual, she would listen, and she would just say, "Pray." That was her answer. And she comes from my aunt shared with me that the family, they were a praying family, that my grandfather was a person who prayed a whole lot, and he actually had some hearing issues. So my aunt shared with me not too long ago that they would hear him, but he would be praying really loud because he couldn't hear how loud he was talking, and he would pray a whole lot. So, and then my aunt is my mother's youngest sister. She's a person of prayer. And so I think that that's something that my mother grew up with, and that's something that she shared with us, and thank God she did. Because I don't know if I didn't believe in the power of prayer and communicating with Jesus, then I would probably have turned out pretty badly. I would have ended up I would have had some significant issues, because I had so many things going on in my mind that were were giving me great problems.
And that is really the message of the bottom line of this, is that your circumstances do not determine who you are.
Correct.
And that God is faithful in his promises and
Amen.
requires a relationship. And in Wendy's story, it is all about her developing a relationship with God and trusting in the power of prayer and having him answer her prayers to guide her out of the projects into the life that she wanted to have, a life that was productive, a life that took her away from the projects, that brought her fulfillment in marriage and motherhood and a successful career. The story is told in Once There Was a Girl, Wendy Reed Randall. That is her website address, wendyreedrandall.com. This is a memoir of a young girl's journey out of the projects, riding on the coattails of the hem of the garment of the Messiah. Wendy,
Amen.
it is an honor and a blessing to have spent this hour with you. I thank you, and I encourage everyone to read this story, that if you feel stuck in your circumstances and all alone, you are neither stuck nor are you alone.
Amen.
God bless you, Wendy, and thank you for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
You're very welcome. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.